On my birthday, my boss's son called me into his office and, without an ounce of shame, dropped the bomb, saying, "Here's my surprise for you. You are fired." I left quietly without making a scene and later told my husband, who just looked at me and smiled. But 4 hours later, the disaster started with 98 missed calls. I had been the head chef at Romano's for 3 years, and when I arrived it was a family business, barely breathing with 2-star reviews and empty tables, but I changed everything, renovated the menu, trained every person on the team, and dedicated myself to sourcing local ingredients. Within a year there wasn't an empty seat and we always had a waiting list, but when old Mr. Romano died last spring, everything took a turn because his son Giovanni took over the restaurant and had other ideas like cutting costs, using frozen products, and firing half the kitchen staff, claiming people wouldn't notice the difference while he counted cash and reviewed receipts. I, Jessica Hartwell, refused to lower the quality we had worked so hard to build, as our ossobuco was legendary and our fresh pasta brought people from 3 states away, so I didn't plan to throw my work overboard just so Giovanni could line his pockets. On my 32nd birthday, after the best week we had ever had, he pulled me into that little office above the dining room, where the balloons the team had put up for me were still hanging in the kitchen, and with that smug smile he said, "Here is my surprise for you. You are fired effective immediately because you are too difficult to work with." I stood there with my apron tied and stained with sauce, watching him reclined like a king in his dad's chair, thinking he was solving the world's problems. But I didn't argue or shed a tear. I just took off my apron, left it on his desk, and walked out, crossing the kitchen where my coworkers looked at me with confused faces, and the drive home felt incredibly long. 3 years of my life, my name, my team, and my recipes all ended up in the hands of someone who thinks ketchup counts as a vegetable, but Scott was waiting for me at home with a bottle of wine and that little smile he gets when he is planning something. He asked how my last birthday shift went as he poured the glasses, and I told him it was terrible, and Giovanni fired me, but his smile just got bigger and he said just in time. I asked him what he meant by just in time, since I had just lost my job and we had the mortgage and bills. But he took out his laptop and started typing like crazy, asking if I remembered the food critic from the Times who came last month, Julia Morrison, the one who wrote that amazing review about my lamb saying it was transcendental. He showed me the screen and said she had been asking around the city for days because she wants to hire a private chef for her daughter's wedding next week, which is very exclusive and well paid, and in fact she might have already received confirmation that I am available. He showed me the email chain where Julia had been looking for me for weeks, and Giovanni never passed me the messages, and she was offering $15,000 for just that one event, which was more than I earned in 3 months at Romano's. I asked Scott how he knew, and just then my cell phone vibrated with a message, then another, and then calls started coming in with Giovanni's number on the screen, so I let it go to voicemail. More calls came in from the assistant, the sous chef, and even the dishwasher, and when I checked there were already 47 missed calls and counting, while Scott was dying of laughter, and kept refreshing the laptop saying, "I had to see this because a devastating review had just come out on all the food portals and blogs published barely an hour ago, right during the dinner service without me." The headline read, "Romano's Restaurant, a Scandalous Fall," and it was a direct denunciation saying the food is worthless, raw chicken, rude service, avoid it, and noting that without me in the kitchen, they served raw chicken parmesan to a famous blogger celebrating her anniversary, the same one who had applauded us 6 months earlier. Photos came out showing pink chicken and burnt vegetables with furious customers filling the dining room, and my cell phone wouldn't stop with calls and messages one after another, while the tone of Giovanni's voice messages went from nervous to desperate saying, "Jesse, please call me. There was a misunderstanding. Jesse, we have to talk. The night was a disaster. Jesse, answer me now. People are getting sick." I could hear people vomiting in the background, and Giovanni screaming at the few remaining kitchen staff. And then a direct call came in from the sous chef Marcus, who spoke quietly and hurriedly saying, "Jesse, you have to know something. Giovanni didn't just fire you today. A week ago, he ordered us to use expired meat from his cousin who gives him a bargain price. Marcus told me he tried to warn him, but Giovanni said it was pure paranoia and that I was too expensive, and now there are 3 people in an ambulance and he is telling everyone it is your fault." I froze with the phone in my hand listening to the sirens pass by outside, and Scott looked serious with his glass raised, so I put it on speaker and asked how he could be blaming me. Marcus continued, saying he is telling the paramedics that you ordered the meat this morning before you left, and that you have been cutting costs for weeks to keep the money, and even the cousin is ready to claim that you placed the order. I felt like my stomach was splitting in two, because Giovanni wasn't just desperate. He wanted to drag me into his mess for his own crimes, so I asked Marcus if he had any proof that it was a lie or any paper trail. He said, "Dude, in my locker I have the invoice from the provider which has today's date and Giovanni's signature. But Jesse, he is threatening to fire anyone who says anything to the health department, so don't delete anything." I told him not to touch that invoice and that I was on my way, and Scott grabbed the keys saying he would drive because I was too upset. On the way to the restaurant, my cell phone was burning up, and arriving at the parking lot with 73 missed calls, the place was surrounded by ambulances, a fire truck, 3 police cars, and the health department van right in front of the door. Giovanni was pacing on the terrace, gesturing like a madman with a woman in an inspector's jacket, and as soon as he saw me get out of the car, his face changed from fear to rage, and he screamed, "There she is," pointing at me saying she is the chef who is sinking me. She ordered the meat. She is sabotaging me because I didn't want to promote her. The inspector turned and looked at me seriously, a woman in her 50s with eyes that had seen it all, and asked if I was Jessica Hartwell, to which I replied, yes. I was the head chef until about 4 hours ago when Mr. Romano fired me. She wrote something in her notebook and asked me to come with her, and Giovanni tried to follow us, but another inspector stopped him saying, "Sir, you have to stay here while we finish the investigation." The kitchen was a complete disaster with my former team scared and squeezed near the walk-in cooler while 2 inspectors checked all the food containers, and Marcus the sous chef looked at me and discreetly pointed to the back office with his head. In the main kitchen, the health inspector took out a digital thermometer and started taking temperatures of the line where everything was wrong. With the soup at 96 degrees and the chicken at 122, none reaching the legal minimum of 135. She asked Marcus how long the food had been like that, and he answered since Chef Jesse left because Mr. Romano told us to leave everything out so as not to lose time during the dinner rush. claiming we were going so fast it didn't matter. The inspector's expression didn't change, but I saw her jaw tighten as she went straight to the industrial fridge, and when she opened it, the smell hit us immediately because something in there was already rotten. She pulled out a box of chicken breasts where the packaging was torn and the meat looked grayish, then checked the label and held it up to the light saying, "This is dated 3 weeks ago. Can you explain why there is expired chicken in the refrigerator?" Marcus glanced at me, then turned back to the inspector, and said, "Mr. Romano's cousin brought it this morning and asked us to use it during the shift, because Chef Jessie had already paid for it, but Chef Jessie wasn't even here this morning because she was fired before that order arrived." The inspector kept the chicken as evidence and asked where the invoice for this order was, so Marcus went for a crumpled sheet in the locker room and handed it to her, and she took a photo and showed it to me, noting Giovanni's signature at the bottom with today's date and time of 10:47 a.m., which was well after I was fired at 10:15 a.m. "Miss Hartwell, I need you to report to the health department office tomorrow for a formal statement," the inspector told me, "but from what I see you are not responsible for this." We walked out together and outside, Giovanni was shouting at a police officer, something about harassment and defamation, but when he saw me come out with the inspector, he turned purple with rage and screamed that I had conspired with her and surely planned everything, and even paid that blogger to speak ill of us. The inspector stepped between him and me and said, "Mr. Romano, your restaurant is closed immediately until the investigation ends because there are several serious violations of health regulations, including food out of temperature, expired ingredients, and bad storage. And 3 people are hospitalized for food poisoning, so the prosecutor will determine if there are criminal charges depending on the severity." Giovanni kept screaming, "It is her fault, she has been robbing me, she cuts expenses, she wants to destroy my business." But the inspector responded very calmly, saying, "Sir, your head chef was not even present today, and you signed for and received the expired meat after firing the chef, and the staff confirmed that you were the one who ordered them to use those ingredients and skip procedures. So if you continue making baseless accusations, the only thing you will achieve is complicating your legal situation further." Giovanni was left speechless, looking at the police, the inspectors, and the customers who were still standing outside, some with napkins in hand and plates half-eaten, and he murmured, "I am screwed." I replied, "No. You fired me for not wanting to risk the safety of the customers. You were the one who brought the expired meat to save a few dollars. You skipped protocols because you thought you knew more than someone with 10 years of experience. So this is not bad luck, Giovanni. These are consequences." Scott touched my elbow and said softly, "Let's go," and as we walked to the car, I heard Giovanni's sobs loud and full of despair echoing in the parking lot, and for a moment I felt pity, but above all I was exhausted. My cell phone vibrated again with a message from Julia Morrison saying she heard what happened at Romano's and was very sorry, asking if this changed my availability for next weekend and saying she understood if I needed time. I answered while Scott drove, saying, "I am still available and very eager to work with you, because what happened at Romano's has nothing to do with my standards or my capacity, and I will send you some menu ideas tomorrow." To which she responded almost immediately, "Perfect. I already told several friends about your work, and I think this can be the start of something very good." When we got home, Scott poured us a real drink, whiskey not wine, and asked how I felt as he sat next to me on the couch. I confessed that I felt as if none of this was real, because in the morning I felt my career was over, and now Giovanni could end up in jail, and I am about to cater the wedding of the year. He clinked his glass with mine, saying sometimes the universe knows what it is doing. And I asked him how he knew to tell Julia I would be available if Giovanni hadn't even fired me yet. Scott smiled and said he wasn't sure. But last week when I came home crying because Giovanni wanted me to use frozen pasta for the ravioli, he started looking for options, asked for favors, moved contacts, and since Julia's daughter comes to his firm, he recommended me when she mentioned they were looking for a chef, so Giovanni firing me only accelerated things. I told him he was amazing and asked if he knew. And he kissed my forehead saying he only does what anyone would do for his wife, but I said it's not the same. That night my cell phone didn't stop ringing, with messages from the Romano's staff wanting to know what happened, and if I was okay, or if there was work where I was, and restaurant owners I've shared kitchens with all surprised and offering support, and even former classmates from culinary school sharing opportunities. The most unexpected message arrived around 11 p.m. from an unknown number saying, "Miss Hartwell, this is David Chen representing 3 people who got sick after dining at Romano's today. We are considering legal action against the restaurant and its owner, and we know you were fired before service today, and might have information about what happened. Could you meet with us?" I showed the message to Scott, who read it twice, and said this is going to get complicated, because Giovanni is going to say the problems come from before, when you were head chef, and that you share responsibility, even if you weren't there today. I thought about all the time I dedicated over 3 years to build Romano's reputation. All the arguments with Giovanni about quality. Every time I refused to cheat. And every inspection we passed without problems while I was in charge of the kitchen. So I told Scott to schedule the meeting, because I wanted to help and make it clear I always fought fairly against the negligence that ended up poisoning those people. He squeezed my hand and said, "Okay, but we are also going to find you a good lawyer." The following week was madness, as I had a meeting with the health department giving my declaration, explaining all the times Giovanni pressured me to cut costs, and how I always refused. And I showed them the documents I kept from every argument and all my objections to using low-quality ingredients or firing the best cooks. It turns out being so organized and documenting everything that happens in the kitchen ends up helping when your ex-boss tries to blame you for a massive poisoning. David Chen, the lawyer, was sharp, and his clients, a couple celebrating their anniversary and a businessman who took foreign investors to Romano's, were furious as the couple ended up in the hospital, and the businessman lost a huge deal because his guests got gravely ill. David asked if I could testify on how Romano's was managed, and I said, of course, and that I had proof, pulling out my phone to show him the folder I had kept for months with screenshots of messages where Giovanni asked me to buy from cheaper providers, emails explaining why certain ingredients needed refrigeration, and photos of his cousin's vans bringing meat without decent refrigeration. David's eyes went wide, and he said this is incredibly detailed, so I told him I like to keep everything in order in the kitchen, and documenting is part of the job. Giovanni's lawyer sought an express settlement offering $50,000 between the 3 clients if they all signed confidentiality agreements and ended the matter. But I asked David what he thought, and he said, Romanos is drowning in legal fees. Its reputation is destroyed, and they could even put Giovanni in criminal trouble, so he is panicking and we can get something better. The lawsuit went ahead, and meanwhile I had to focus on Julia Morrison's daughter's wedding, which was going to be at an estate on the outskirts, and Julia gave me a budget that even gave me chills, asking me to do something spectacular. I called back 3 of the cooks Giovanni wanted to fire, and together we assembled a 7-course menu that summarized everything I have learned in my life as a chef. The wedding was on a Saturday in late September with perfect weather and golden light entering through the trees of the estate, and I spent 3 days preparing everything, caring for every last detail, including that lamb dish that made Julia a fan of my cooking, which I perfected even more, cooking it 6 hours over low heat in red wine, and herbs cut from the garden, until it fell apart just by touching it with a fork. We prepared the pasta in the morning by hand, sheet by sheet, and the dessert was a deconstructed tiramisu that made the guests lick their plates. Julia looked for me in the makeshift kitchen we had set up in the garage around 9 at night with tears in her eyes, saying, "Jessie, this is the most incredible food I have tasted. My daughter won't stop crying from happiness, and half the guests are already asking for your number." I felt the knot in my chest loosen, the one I had carried since Giovanni fired me, and I thanked her for trusting me, but she didn't accept it, saying, "The one doing the favor here is you and I, since we are going to work together a lot." She wasn't wrong, because by the end of the night I had 12 cards from wedding planners, event coordinators, and even people planning corporate retreats, including a lady who wanted me to organize her husband's 60th birthday with a blank check, and another organizing a gala needing someone to handle a formal dinner for 200 people. Scott picked me up at midnight, and I got in the car exhausted but happier than ever. And when he asked how it went, I told him, I think I just formally opened my own catering business. He smiled and said it was about time. The following Tuesday, I received a call from David Chen, saying Romanos had declared bankruptcy because the health department investigation found endless violations since Giovanni took charge, and they revoked the license forever. Giovanni owed more than $300,000 in lawyers, hospital bills, and settlements. And David told me there was more because Giovanni tried to sue me for defamation and interfering with his business, but his lawyer withdrew everything as soon as we showed your documentation, because it turns out Giovanni confessed to his own lawyer that everything you said to the inspectors was true, so his lawyer left him alone. I let myself fall onto the couch asking if this was really over, and he said almost. The 3 clients accepted a settlement, and Giovanni's home insurance is covering almost everything, so he is in ruins, but that doesn't touch you anymore, and you have no responsibility in this. When I hung up, I sat there for a long time thinking that 10 weeks ago I had been fired on my birthday, leaving humiliated and fearing the future, and now Romanos doesn't even exist, Giovanni is finished, and I have more work than I can handle. My phone rang again, and it was Marcus, my former sous chef, saying, "Jessie, I heard they closed the restaurant and I've tried to look for a job but there is nothing. I know you are into catering, do you need help?" I thought about the coming party, the gala, and the 3 weddings next month, and asked if he could start Monday for the same salary he earned at Romanos plus a share of the tips. I told him if I want to keep up with this pace, I'm going to need at least 4 people. And by that same day, I had recruited my entire core team from Romanos, exactly the ones Giovanni treated like disposable labor. And we built a system that worked super well for organizing events. 3 months after being fired, I landed a banquet for a tech company for 500 people with a full buffet, meat stations, and a dessert bar. And they were so happy that the client asked if I was interested in taking charge of all the office food with a monthly contract worth more than my entire annual salary at Romanos, so I signed right there without thinking. 6 months passed since my firing when I received a message from a number I didn't have saved, and I was about to delete it, but something made me open it. It read, "Jessie, it's Giovanni. I know I have no right to look for you, and I know what I did is unforgivable, but I needed to tell you I am sorry. My dad built that restaurant for over 30 years and I ruined it in less than 1. I was stubborn and arrogant and hurt a lot of people, and you deserved better. Everyone did." He wrote that he is starting from zero, working as a line cook at a diner in Pennsylvania, learning what he should have learned a long time ago, and he didn't expect my forgiveness, but just wanted to tell me I was right about everything, and hoped I would do incredibly well with my business because I earned it. I read the message 3 times, and part of me wanted to leave him on read, and another part wanted to respond with something strong about karma, but in the end, I just wrote "Good luck in your new chapter," blocked the number, and kept working. I had to finish the menu for a wedding that weekend where the bride wanted seafood with Mediterranean touches, and I already had fresh branzino from my trusted provider, wild scallops from Maine, and handmade pasta, the kind of food that takes time, money, and true skill to do well, dishes that build your reputation and make people return again and again. Hartwell Catering, my company, just celebrated its 1st anniversary last month, and in 1 year we covered 127 events and billed just over $400,000, and I already have 6 people working full-time and a waiting list of clients. Next month we are moving to our own kitchen, a beautiful space with new equipment and enough room to handle several events at the same time, and Julia Morrison still recommends me to clients, telling me last week I am the most requested private chef in the city. The new restaurant that opened where Romanos used to be lasted only 3 months before closing, and now the place is empty with a "for rent" sign in the window, and sometimes I pass by there on my way to an event, and I don't feel anger anymore. Nor do I feel like I won or got revenge. I simply feel grateful that Giovanni's stubbornness, my husband's plans, and Julia's good timing coincided just when they should have. I was fired on my birthday, and in that moment it was the worst day of my life. But everything had to fall apart to give me another opportunity and force me to create something that was truly mine, something nobody could take away from me because of other people's mistakes. My parents called me last week because someone at their church told them about my business and asked if I could handle their 40th anniversary party next summer for 75 guests with a formal dinner and no budget limit. I sent them the proposal and they accepted instantly, and my dad called especially to tell me how proud he was and that he always knew I had talent and wanted to show off his daughter's food to all his friends, and I thanked him and really felt it. I hung up and got back to work because from the whole disaster with Giovanni, the thing I learned most is that the best revenge isn't making a scene or sinking anyone. It is building something so good that those who doubted you can't look away, and being so successful that those who thought they could destroy you end up being just a footnote in your story. Giovanni didn't ruin me. He liberated me. And I wish I hadn't had to go through being fired on my birthday to realize it, but now I know, and I will never work for someone who doesn't value what I do, because now I make the rules. Last night, Scott surprised me coming home with a bottle of champagne and a small wrapped box containing a charm for my bracelet, a little chef's knife with a date engraved. And when I asked what it was, he said the day Giovanni fired you was the day your true life began. I put it on immediately. And this morning I wore it to a corporate breakfast for 60 people who wanted something gourmet but relaxed. So I prepared individual frittatas with fresh herbs and local cheese, fresh fruit parfaits with homemade granola, and mini scones with 3 types of jam. When the breakfast ended, the client approached me. She is the director of a boutique hotel downtown, and told me they are going to remodel the restaurant, and are looking for someone to design the menu and supervise the kitchen, asking if I was interested in being the consultant. She asked for my card and I told her to send the details by email, and on the way home I just thought about how curious life can be, how a door closes and then 10 open, and how sometimes getting fired is the beginning, not the end. Giovanni gave me a lesson, even if unintentionally, that my work has value on its own, not because of the name on the entrance, that I don't need anyone else's last name to advance, and that what I do speaks much louder than any position. I will never thank him for firing me, but I don't regret it anymore because now I am happier than ever and building something important that is mine. And sometimes the best birthday gift is the one you give yourself, even if you don't realize it until months later, even if it seems like a disaster at first, and even if it starts with a smirk and a "you're fired." Update 1, the lawsuit. 3 weeks after launching Hartwell Catering, my lawyer called me with news that hit me like a bucket of cold water, saying, "Jessie, we have a problem." It turns out Giovanni's insurance company is trying to deny his claim, saying everything was intentional negligence, which would void the insurance coverage, and put the settlements with the people who got sick from food poisoning at risk. I asked how that affected me, feeling my stomach knot up, and he said they want you to testify in court about how Giovanni worked in the restaurant and if you think he endangered clients on purpose. I didn't want to think about returning to that place, or spending hours in a courtroom reliving the worst episode of my working life. But that same night, David Chen called me saying, "I know it's a drag, but my clients really need your testimony because without it they won't receive any compensation for what happened to them." The Harpers, the couple celebrating their anniversary, both lost their jobs due to the illness. Mrs. Harper even had to cancel a work trip, and Mr. Harper missed his daughter's graduation because he was hospitalized, and on the other hand, Mr. Reeves, the businessman, lost a contract worth more than $100,000 because his clients thought he took them to an unsanitary place on purpose. When David put it like that, I knew I had no choice, because all those completely innocent people were harmed just by Giovanni's greed, so I agreed to meet David to prepare my statement. The testimony was scheduled for a Thursday morning in October, and I wore my best professional clothes, a navy blue suit I bought years ago for a cooking competition, and David was waiting for me outside the office where Giovanni's insurance lawyers were. He warned me in the elevator that they would try to make me look incompetent and insinuate that the problems at Romano's also happened when I was in charge and that I share the blame, so I should just tell the truth and not let them provoke me. The boardroom was freezing, made on purpose to make one feel uncomfortable, and Giovanni's lawyer was a skinny guy in a suit who looked at me as if I were gum stuck to his shoe, but luckily Giovanni did not show up, only his insurance lawyers and a court clerk. "Miss Hartwell," the skinny guy started with a tone dripping with condescension. "You were the head chef at Romano's for 3 years, right? And during that time, the restaurant passed all health inspections with perfect scores." He pushed a document across the table, saying this is a report from 14 months ago, marking a minor infraction because cleaning products were stored incorrectly, asking if I would call that a perfect score. I replied calmly that the fault had been in the dining room closet, having nothing to do with the kitchen, and was corrected in less than a day. And the kitchen, while I was there, never had a single warning, but I was aware that the owner, Mr. Romano, was worried about food costs, right? I answered that every restaurant owner watches that topic as it is part of managing any business. He asked if I refused to follow several suggestions to save costs, and I said yes. I refused to do anything that compromised food safety and quality. He pulled out another paper saying he had emails where I told Mr. Romano that his proposals were dangerous and short-sighted, and called that insubordination. But David intervened, asking if he was going to ask a question or give a sermon. The lawyer gave him a furious look and asked Miss Hartwell, yes or no. Did you or did you not tell Mr. Romano his suggestions were dangerous? I answered that I told him using expired meat was dangerous, not maintaining food at a good temperature was dangerous, and firing experienced cooks to bring in unprepared people was dangerous, and on all 3 things I was right, as the poisoning outbreak demonstrates. He asked if I could guarantee those practices were not done when I still worked there, and I said yes I can. I have dated photos from the last week. I worked showing temperature logs and fresh ingredients. I have text messages from employees saying Giovanni's cousin started bringing expired meat only after I was fired. And there are signed statements from 3 prep cooks, who were there when Giovanni told them to ignore protocols because I was no longer there. The lawyer's face hardened, asking where I got those alleged statements, and I said David got them from employees who contacted me after the outbreak because they felt guilty. The declaration lasted more than 3 hours as they tried to turn everything around, asking if I sabotaged Giovanni for revenge, or created false evidence, or was benefiting from Romano's closing, even digging into my finances. But I had everything in order, with photos, emails, messages, and testimonies. And by the end, the lawyer looked defeated, and frankly frustrated. Outside, David gave me a pat of encouragement, saying I did incredibly well staying serene and clear, and now the insurance company will have a very hard time getting out of it. 2 weeks later, they finally reached an agreement, where the Harpers received $85,000, and Mr. Reeves $120,000 for the lost business, all paid by Giovanni's insurance. And the premium of his policy went up so much he had to cancel it, putting another nail in the coffin of his career as a restaurateur. But the legal show didn't end there, because Giovanni's cousin who sold the bad meat decided to sue me for defamation, claiming I ruined his reputation by telling the experts about his shady meats. His lawyer sent me a letter demanding $500,000 for loss of clients and emotional damage. But Scott reviewed the case and laughed, saying it was the most ridiculous lawsuit he had seen, because right there he admitted he sold expired meat, and that his business depended on restaurants buying cheap expired product. My lawyer agreed, saying they would throw it out as soon as they read it because he was suing me for reporting a real crime, which is my duty as a citizen. So we filed a motion to dismiss, and the judge threw it out almost immediately, ordering Giovanni's cousin to pay all my legal fees. It was $5,000 that within 3 weeks were deposited in my company account, and I spent them equipping the catering company better by buying an industrial mixer that could mix up to 20 pounds of dough at once, which seemed like divine justice. However, the cousin didn't stop with his childishness, and started leaving one-star reviews on every page where Hartwell Catering appeared, saying I had poisoned people at Romanos, and was now covering it up, claiming my food was a danger, and my business should be closed. It was clear all the reviews were his because he wrote the same way with the same weird details and uploaded them minutes apart on different sites. So Scott documented everything, and my lawyer sent his cousin a cease and desist letter, explaining that continuing to publish false reviews was harassment and could end in another serious lawsuit. As soon as they received it, the reviews disappeared, and 3 days later I received an email from the cousin's lawyer, clearly uncomfortable, offering me a settlement to close the topic, offering $10,000 for the harassment and a public apology he would have to publish on all the pages where he posted his lies. I accepted, and the following week, the apology appeared, saying I, Vincent Moretti, falsely accused Jessica Hartwell and her company of violating food safety norms. These accusations were lies. Miss Hartwell had nothing to do with the poisoning incident at Romanos restaurant and has an unblemished history in food safety and quality. I deeply regret any damage from my false statements and retract them totally. It was a small victory, but it tasted like glory, especially because 3 potential clients looked for me, saying that, although they doubted at first because of those reviews, after the apology they decided to hire me. Meanwhile, the Romanos location remained empty, as the owner couldn't find anyone who wanted to rent such a burned place. Until finally, a cafeteria decided to rent it, but they gutted everything inside. The kitchen, the dining room, everything went. Once I passed by while they were remodeling and managed to see them taking out the stove where I cooked hundreds of dishes, the ovens where I baked my bread, and the tables where I taught so many cooks who today work all over the city. And it felt weird, as if they were dismantling part of my history, but it was also a relief, as if they finally removed the bad from there. Romanos had its moment when old Mr. Romano was alive and I ran the kitchen, but Giovanni ruined it, so maybe it was good to let go and start fresh without ghosts. That night Scott found me looking out our kitchen window, asking if I was okay, knowing they were dismantling the kitchen I made at Romanos. And I said there is nothing left of what I built there, but he hugged me from behind, saying, Jesse, you didn't build Romanos. You built your reputation, and that remains stronger than ever, and now you are doing better than in those times. He was right, although it did hurt to see 3 years summarized in a few piles of rubble. Then my cell phone vibrated with an email from Julia Morrison saying a friend's daughter was getting married in the spring with 600 guests and an open budget, wanting me to handle it because, according to Julia, her friend wouldn't stop talking about how incredible the food was at her daughter's wedding. It was $75,000 for the event, and I had never seen such a large contract, so I showed it to Scott and he just smiled, saying, see, Romanos is history and yours is just beginning. That night I accepted the job and opened a bottle of good champagne, giving myself permission to celebrate, not for beating Giovanni or for revenge, but just for the fact of continuing, for all I had grown, and for the new life I was making from what remained when he tried to destroy me. 6 months later, with Hartwell Catering running well, I received an unexpected call from a TV producer wanting to interview me for a program about women entrepreneurs, saying, we heard your story and how you built your business after an unfair firing is inspiring. I almost said no because I didn't want to be the chef who got fired, but Scott made me see it wasn't about Giovanni but about me and what I achieved after. So, the interview aired on a Tuesday night, featuring 5 minutes where I told my path from culinary school to Romanos and then to Hartwell Catering, filmed cooking and talking to clients, ending with a shot of me serving lamb ossobuco, the dish that started it all. My phone started ringing non-stop with 37 new reservation requests for the next day, 4 restaurant owners looking for menu advice, 2 job offers from hotels, and an email from a publisher asking if I was interested in writing a cookbook. A cookbook? Me, the chef, fired for being demanding. I met with the publisher the following week, and they wanted a book of comfort food with a gourmet touch featuring the recipes I perfected at Romanos, and new dishes from Hartwell Catering, along with stories on how to build a business, fight for quality, and survive a professional disaster. Offering a $40,000 advance. I signed 3 days later, and Giovanni somehow found out and wrote me from a new email with a long and nonsensical message, saying he felt betrayed that I was profiting from his family's restaurant, exploiting his dad's legacy, and building my career on the ashes of Romanos' tragedy. I didn't respond, just sent it to my lawyer in case he tried something, and blocked that email too, because some people just don't understand that their actions have consequences. Giovanni fired me. He served expired meat. He sickened the customers. He wanted to blame me for his carelessness. And then he lost everything. But in his head I was the villain who destroyed him. And those kinds of stories are simply not my problem. It took me 8 months to write the book, doing it between catering events, testing recipes in my new industrial kitchen, and polishing every detail. And since the publisher wanted honesty, I gave my all, describing the arguments with Giovanni over ingredients, the moment I was fired, the panic of starting from zero, and the success that came little by little, titling it From Scratch, Building a Life and Career, When Everything Falls Apart. On the cover is me in my kitchen with hands full of flour and a smile, and it came out in March, landing on the regional bestseller list in 2 weeks, with a cooking magazine dedicating an entire report to me. I did 3 more TV interviews, and the presentation with a demo at a bookstore filled up in less than 2 days, while Hartwell Catering kept growing as we did the wedding for 600 people, perfectly making the bride cry when tasting the food. Her mom even hired me to organize her own 50th birthday party 6 months later, and we hired 3 more people and rented a second industrial kitchen to meet demand, while on weekends we started giving cooking classes for amateurs, wanting to learn professional techniques. A year after being fired, Hartwell Catering had billed $680,000. My salary was double what I earned at Romanos, and my whole team received bonuses and profit sharing. We bought a delivery van with our logo painted on the side, and one day I passed the old Romanos location and saw the cafeteria that opened there had also failed, and it was empty again with a for rent sign, seemingly cursed not by something paranormal, but by pure incompetence and Giovanni's greed. But I wasn't cursed. I was triumphing with every event attended, every returning client, every 5-star review, and every time someone said they drove 2 hours just to go to one of my dinners, proving Giovanni couldn't destroy me. He only moved out of the way to let me reach something much better. My parents went to a Hartwell catering event for the first time in August for the golden anniversary party of some friends, where I planned a special menu with beef Wellington, roasted vegetables with herb butter, and a chocolate tart that took 2 days to prepare properly. My mom found me in the kitchen during dessert with tears in her eyes, saying I had no idea. All those years at Romano's, I thought you just cooked, but this, Jessie, is art. It is magic. You achieved something incredible. I thanked her, although I still didn't believe it was real, and she hugged me tight, apologizing for not seeing it before and not supporting me when Giovanni fired me, saying she thought I had lost everything, but I hadn't lost anything. I found myself. After that night, my mom became Hartwell Catering's biggest promoter, telling everyone, bringing friends to my classes, posting about the book on Facebook, and even helping at big events, chopping vegetables and washing dishes with my team. It felt good, as if I had finally proven what I always wanted, that I didn't just know how to do it but could do it excellently, and excellence doesn't depend on someone else's restaurant to shine because it brings its own light. About a year and a half after I was fired, Giovanni declared bankruptcy, lost the house, and went to live with a cousin, although that relationship also ended badly, and the last I heard, he was working at a restaurant chain in another state, not as a manager, but just as a line cook. When I found out, I felt neither justice nor satisfaction, only sadness, knowing he took something good and ruined it out of arrogance and not knowing how to do things right, feeling sorry for the people he hurt, and because he could never accept responsibility. But by then I had stopped expecting Giovanni to apologize, because even if he admitted it, it didn't matter anymore, as the only person who had to believe in me was me, and finally I had achieved it. 2 years after being fired, I won a local award for Best New Culinary Venture, and they gave me a plaque at an elegant dinner where I didn't know half the people, but Scott went in a suit and my whole team came and we took photos laughing on the stairs outside. When I went up to receive the award, I said little, stating that 2 years ago I was fired on my birthday thinking my career was ending, but it was actually just starting. And this award is not just mine, but belongs to all the people who chose me for their special events, to every member of my team who believed we could do something different, and above all, to my husband who always knew I would be okay even when I couldn't see it myself. The applause sounded sincere and loud, and I looked into the audience, seeing Julia Morrison standing and clapping, my parents crying, and my team celebrating as if I had won an Olympic medal, and I remembered Giovanni in his office with that smirk telling me I was fired. I remembered how broken I felt leaving that kitchen, and the fear that maybe I would never work again. But that version of me was another person left in the past, along with Romanos, and all the fears I carried for years, because I was enough. Even better than enough. It was exactly what I needed to do, and Giovanni's little surprise of firing me on my birthday ended up being the best gift of my life. Only at that moment I didn't know it. Update 2. The expansion. At the start of my 3rd year leading Hartwell Catering, I ran into a problem I never imagined, which was too much work, with a waiting list for events of almost half a year and rejecting 2 requests for every one we accepted. My team was always running at 1,000 miles an hour doing overtime, so we had to do something different, and Scott suggested growing, hiring more people, looking for a bigger kitchen, or even thinking about opening a restaurant. A restaurant? Just hearing the word made my stomach turn, because after everything with Romanos returning to that world seemed like looking for trouble. But the idea stuck in my head, and I started making plans and sketches at 3 in the morning, for a simple place for maybe 40 people with a brief menu changing by season, just the type of food that once made Romanos so good before Giovanni ruined everything. I told Julia Morrison at one of our usual lunches, and she immediately made that face she gets when something really excites her, saying, "Jessie, I know the perfect place. My brother-in-law owns a building downtown, and the corner spot has a great kitchen that has been empty for months, as he has been looking for someone who takes quality seriously." I confessed I didn't know if I was ready to throw myself back into that responsibility after Romanos, but Julia said with great confidence, "You won't be chasing someone else's dream anymore. This would be yours with your menu, your rules, and your standards, so what happened at Romanos won't happen if you are in charge." She got me an appointment for the following week, and the place was a beauty, with exposed brick walls and huge windows facing the street, an equipped and newly remodeled kitchen left by the previous tenant who left for personal reasons unrelated to business. The owner, Thomas Brennan, was a calm man of about 60 who showed me the place without trying to force me, just pointing out important things and waiting for me to ask. I asked why the previous restaurant closed, and he said the owner retired and moved to Florida, leaving ovens, refrigerators, and whatever I wanted. I ran my hand over the 6-burner stove, seeing it was better equipment than we had at Romanos. The cold room was spacious and clean, and the prep area had plenty of room for several cooks. Thomas said he saw I was considering it and told me he didn't want franchises or chains but was looking for someone who truly loved food to make this place the pride of the neighborhood, adding, he knew my story and what happened at Romanos, and someone like me was exactly what he was looking for. The rent was reasonable and all equipment included, plus the location was incredible, in a neighborhood just becoming trendy but still accessible, so I went for it and rented the place. Hartwell's opened 6 months later on a Friday in October, starting small with only 32 seats and strictly by reservation with a menu of 8 main courses changing every 2 weeks depending on the season. The first night I was nervous, thinking what if nobody comes or they hate everything or I am about to make a huge mistake, but we filled every table and the same for the 2nd and 3rd nights, and by the end of the first week there was a waiting list for 2 months. Reviews started coming out from food bloggers and local magazines until a national critic dropped in by surprise and everyone said the same thing, that Hartwell's was what high cuisine should be, elegant without being snobbish, expensive but worth every dollar, food that respected the product and technique, without trying to impress just for innovation. We won the award for Best New Restaurant in the city within 4 months, and the Culinary Association recognized us for emerging excellence while a major gastronomy magazine put us on their list of hidden gems. Even so, I had Giovanni in my head remembering when he told me I was too difficult to work with and didn't know how to yield, and yes, he was right about not yielding, because I didn't serve a dish if it wasn't perfect and never cut quality just to earn more. But far from being a defect, that was the foundation of everything I achieved. Marcus, my head of kitchen, approached me at 6 months with an idea about his cousin Vera, a producer with a ranch about an hour away who worked sustainably cultivating heirloom vegetables and raising free-range livestock wanting to sell to restaurants, but rejected for high prices. I told him to make the appointment and we went the following Sunday to a farm of 80 acres filled with fields and gardens cared for in detail, where Vera, a woman of about 40 with hands hardened by work, showed us chickens, pigs, vegetable beds, and efficient irrigation. I asked how much it would cost to buy everything from her, and she gave a high price, about 30% above what I normally paid. But Scott calculated on his phone, saying it lowers the margin but doesn't drown you, and will be a super hook for clients. I shook Vera's hand, closing the deal, and we changed the complete menu, making farm-to-table literal, where every vegetable came straight from Vera's field, and every cut of meat from animals she raised, putting her farm's name on the menu. The response was brutal, as people loved knowing exactly where their food came from, that the chicken ran free and the vegetables were freshly cut, so we raised prices to level the cost, losing a few clients but gaining triple the people looking for that experience. When the restaurant turned 1 year old, a heavy culinary magazine dedicated a report titled, From Farewell to Phenomenon, How a Chef Built an Empire True to Her Principles. The reporter, Alexis Chen, came prepared knowing about Romanos and Giovanni, and asked if I was ever tempted to yield when money was tight, and I told the truth that especially at the beginning I was, but I couldn't get the people who got sick at Romanos out of my head knowing Giovanni's cuts had real consequences, so I wasn't going to put profit before quality. The report came out 2 months later with 8 pages of photos and quotes where Julia Morrison called it a love letter to ethical cooking. Giovanni saw it differently, and somehow got my email sending a long, bitter message, claiming the article was defamation, that I manipulated the reporter, that my success was thanks to destroying his reputation, and that I owed him everything for stealing his dad's clients and recipes. The message was out of place and venomous, so I sent it to my lawyer and blocked him, because some people never learn that they destroyed themselves. The restaurant's second anniversary was a big private party with everyone who had been part of the journey, including employees, clients, Vera, Thomas, Julia with her family, and even old colleagues from Romanos when Mr. Romano was alive. I gave a short speech thanking them for trusting what we were creating, and telling how 2 years ago I was scared to death, but look at us now with 2 kitchens functioning, Hartwell Catering billing over $1 million a year, and the restaurant booked 3 months in advance. Scott raised his glass to Jessie, who turned the worst day of her life into the first of something extraordinary, and everyone toasted. That night alone in the dining room I thought about Giovanni in his dad's office telling me I was fired, and how life turned his cruelty into the spark of everything good I have now, realizing I would never be here if he hadn't forced me out. My cell phone rang with an email from a TV network wanting to discuss a cooking show of 6 episodes where I could decide the format, so I smiled and noted to call them the next day, then turned off the lights and went home with Scott to the life we had built from the ashes. 3 years after opening Hartwell's restaurant, I received a call from Patricia Romano, Giovanni's mother, saying she needed to tell me something, because before dying Giovanni's dad left me something in his will that Giovanni never wanted to give me. She said yesterday while cleaning the storage she found the papers that I was supposed to receive 3 years ago. Explaining my husband wrote you a letter and left you his collection of recipes, all the original recipes of the Romano family dating back 4 generations, because he said you were the only person who truly understood what he wanted for the restaurant. I felt my strength leave me, and fell into my office chair asking why she was telling me this now. And she answered, because Giovanni has been lying to me for 3 years, telling me you ruined the family business for revenge. But last week I found boxes with papers of the lawsuits proving he was the one who used bad meat and tried to blame you. She started crying and I felt compassion, saying, Mrs. Romano, I am very sorry you found out this way, but I never wanted to hurt your family. I simply couldn't watch Giovanni destroy what his dad built. She whispered, forgive me for everything Giovanni put you through and for not believing you. Asking to see me to give me the letter and recipes, and we agreed to meet the next Tuesday at a coffee shop. She looked older than I remembered and brought a worn leather folder saying it was Leonardo's. Explaining, he started writing these recipes when we opened Romano's 42 years ago, and some date back to his grandmother in Sicily, calling them the soul of the restaurant. I opened the folder carefully, seeing dozens of handwritten cards with faded proportions for pasta dough and sauces, along with a sealed envelope with my name written by Mr. Romano. Patricia said he wrote that letter about 6 months before dying, knowing he didn't have much time, and tasked her to deliver it if anything happened, but Giovanni said it wasn't necessary. I opened the envelope, reading the letter written in shaky handwriting which said, Dear Jessie, if you are reading this, it is because I am no longer here, and I hope my son is treating you well and maintaining the standard we achieved together.